A really warm welcome to you all. This is the first class of Easy Habits for Happiness, Easy Habits for a Happy Life. So my name's Miffi. I've been at Lone Retirement Centre for a very long time now, and with this course, I first started developing it way back in maybe 2005, and it grew into 3 or 4 different courses, mostly from people's questions about how to, live in a modern world. So the course is, it's based on Buddhist psychology, and then I try and bring in Western kind of pop science of neuroscience and psychology, so that we kind of get a bridge between the Buddhist psychology and our Western background. So hopefully it's going to be relevant whether you're Buddhist or not, whether you're religious or not, doesn't matter, because human emotion is universal, and what we can do about it is also universal. It doesn't rely on belief. So I'm going to start with a quote from a fellow called Paul McKenna, who's not a Buddhist, but he's a hypnotist, actually. And this is from his book, I Can Make You Happy. And what I really like about it is it's evidence-based. So he put it really nicely. So the quote is this: "What if happiness was nothing more than a few simple disciplines practiced every day? And misery was simply a few errors of judgment or bad habits repeated every day?" So when you put it like that, it kind of seems doable, doesn't it? And I mean, it's not through lack of effort that we haven't achieved the happiness that we all instinctually yearn for, but it's not actually that we're even educated of how to find happiness. We're not educated about it at school. We're educated how to find money and all sorts of kind of external things, but nothing about how to be a good human being in the world, how to not burn out, how to find peace of mind, how to not get stressed, how to find meaning and happiness. We're not shown how to live harmoniously. So, and then often, even if we are taught some form of ethics or morality, often it's with dogma. It's based on real belief or kind of a fundamentalist kind of view, or it's quite judgmental, or it's couched in a political or religious framework that just doesn't sit well with us. Often it's not a universal ethics either, it's quite biased. So...
Sorry, Miffi, there's a question about what the name of the book was.
Oh, the book. So I'll go through, there's some best books list in a moment, there's a slide, but this one's called I Can Make You Happy. And if you've got the notes, there is a slide with most of the books that I read from in this whole class. So that's kind of like the top 10. So let's see. That's kind of, I'll come back to this quote several times because it's a really nice grounding kind of quote. What we're going to look at in the course. So Charlie Brown, incidentally, what is happiness? We're going to look at what's the ultimate recipe for happiness. So the first part of the course, we're going to look at, well, actually, what is happiness? Because we all want it. We don't, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? And everything that we do, whether we're concentrating or not, we're hoping it's going to bring us some form of happiness. But how successful have we been at it? And are we just kind of waiting for it to happen to us? Is it something that we can buy? Is it random? Is it something we can cultivate? It's overarching preoccupation that we have, but it's really difficult to even figure out what it is. So that's mostly what we're going to look at today. Then we're also going to spend a couple of weeks on looking at what a habit is. So the course is Easy Habits for Happiness. So the happiness part, then the habit part. How do habits develop? What's the cycle? And if we can pinpoint each step of the cycle, then for negative habits, we can deconstruct the cycle step by step. So instead of just trying to squish it down and force ourselves to change, which takes a lot of energy, and when we don't have the energy, then we just revert back. How to deconstruct bad habits. We're also going to see how come bad habits are, or destructive kind of habitual attitudes and behavior happen really easily, and positive habits take effort. Why is that? And then the last half of the course, we're going to look at what we can do instead. So winding back the negative habits, but instead of just leaving a vacuum, what kind of behavior can we replace them with? How can we develop really good automatic behavior that that cultivates happiness, that creates harmony around us, that gives us energy? What's the best way to act, to communicate, to think? So that's the outline of the course. Generally, when we have our real live courses in person, we have some introductions. But what I thought we could do at the moment is in the chat, if you'd just like to take a moment to just write down into the chat just a word or two about what you hope to gain from this course, like why you're here, what's the main reason that you're here today. So it doesn't have to be a huge sentence, just can be a couple of dot points. The obvious one, of course, being, well, we want to be happy, but there might be something, a more particular issue. Okay, so become aware of habits that don't serve the world and replace them with those that do. Practical application of the spiritual, very nice. Continuing the journey while in isolation. Well, that's right, and it's like we're physically isolated, but our mind has no barriers. And just because we're physically isolated, it doesn't have to throw us as badly as we might first think. Okay, techniques to wind back unskillful habits and replace them with more beneficial ones. Yep, well, we'll definitely be covering that. Stopping bad habits, increasing daily habits that serve me. Hello, Galaxy S8. I wonder who you are. You know, you can rename yourself. You hover over your name, there's a little thing called more, and then you can rename yourself so you don't have to be a corporation. So yes, we can see we're pretty much in agreement with each other, aren't we, already? Using the time at home in productive ways, breaking down bad habits, learning about habits and how to change them to better ones, more positive life and less stress. Yep, good, good, good. So thank you. Remind ourselves how our brain jumps to the negative instead of the positive. And to be in Lungri Tongpa Centre, we miss it. Oh, so Lavinia in Tasmania, fantastic. Yeah, so that's why I've got a beautiful Buddha statue behind us, so that you can kind of feel that you're back here again. Okay, so let's see. Here are the books. So Paul McKenna down there, I Can Make You Happy. A couple of other ones. So the one that I'll be reading from today is the top left, Happiness by Matthew Ricard, a guide to developing life's most important skill. Happiness as a skill. And a couple of other ones. So as we go through, I'll hold them up and let you know where the various readings come from. So just to kind of put things into perspective, I've had a bit of a checkered background. I was brought up a Buddhist. My mother started this centre, and so I was a very conservative, serious child. And then, of course, when I kind of left home, then I did a great big detour to sex, drugs, and rock and roll, basically, and incredibly fortunately, that detour managed to come back to Lungri Tumpa Centre. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened to me. So the reason I came back to Lungri Tumpa Centre after many years of making circus costumes, drinking an enormous amount of vodka, being very creative, real rabble-rouser, probably extraordinarily obnoxious. So after many years of that, of being self-employed and quite poor, still thinking myself as a Buddhist, not so sure. I probably had Buddhist tendencies, but I probably wasn't a practicing Buddhist. And then in the late 90s, my mother, who was running this centre, Kim, she got sick and died of lung cancer, and I kind of inherited her role in the centre and felt completely unprepared and inappropriate to do so. And I kind of came to Lungri Tumpa Centre with just a 3-month plan to keep the centre going somehow and then go back to my rabble-rousing life. But it didn't turn out that way. It's like 23 years later, and here I am still attempting to step into my mother's shoes and keep the centre going. And now it's run by, you know, a cast of thousands instead of just a sweet little old lady. So you can read a little bit about her in Vicky Mackenzie's book, Why Buddhism. It's a really interesting story there. So I think it was only when I came back to Lungri Tumpa Centre as a grown-up that I started actually studying Buddhism and trying to really apply it in my life, but actually get some study behind me. So when we're going through this course, I'll let you know whether it's something that comes from the Buddhist teachings or any of these other books here, whether it's something that comes from my own experience, of which I've got a limitless amount of embarrassing stories to share with you to illustrate the point, or whether it's something I don't know and I'll find out. So you'll know where you stand as we go through the course. Now, if you've managed to have the notes, then in the workbooks there of the first of the PowerPoint slides, there's a little place there where this slide is, where you can just write down your definition of happiness, or just write it in a notebook, and some of the things that you feel make you happy. When you say, oh, I'll be happy when this happens, or I'll be happy if I get to do that, or whatever it is. And this will just help us focus for the class, so that it kind of makes a bridge between the theory of Buddhism and drawing it into your own life. So we've got to start somewhere. So let's start with something really close to our heart. If you don't have the notes, don't worry, that's okay. Just on a scrap of paper, write it down, because at the end of the class, we're going to have a look and see what's changed. I'm going to really encourage you to try and write some of this stuff down, because I've found, especially with the homework, the reflection sheets, there's one for each class, and that's really the make or break difference between getting the most out of the course or not. So over and over again, over the last decade or two that we've been leading these balancing emotions courses, the difference between it being a life-changing event and being just interesting, the people who do the reflection sheets, they just say, it saved me, it changed my life. And it's because you start really engaging with the material yourself. You make it personal. The people that just like look at the questions and go, oh, they're good questions, but don't write the answers, it's just an interesting class. So it's really up to you. I know there's a huge amount of unconscious resistance to filling in the worksheets, but I cannot encourage you enough to do so, because just drawing those connections, it opens up a whole universe. It really does make a huge difference. So getting the most out of the course is actually writing the things down. So let's see. if you like, does anyone want to put into the chat about, no, actually that's going to be a bit tricky. Let's just do a little meditation, just to focus our mind and really set our motivation, just like on this slide. And so you don't have to close your eyes or anything. It's more when we do a reflection, like when you're reading, your eyes are looking at the page, but your attention is inwards. So just draw your attention inwards and take a few breaths and become kind of settled in your posture and grounded. And we've been thinking a little bit about what is happiness, what your definition of happiness is. It might be a bit tricky even to grasp what it is. Often it's I'll know it when I see it feeling. Some of you might have felt happiness will come when there's a particular event. You get to do something, you get to achieve something, you get to travel, you get the job that you hope for. Some of you might have put down that it's a cessation of a problem. When you become free of stress, it might also be more to do with an inner activity, being able to find a purpose or help others, contribute to your job or your family, the world. But probably you would have had a bit of trouble pinpointing exactly what is happiness. So just think for a moment, if you actually had a choice, what kind of happiness would you go for? Would you go for kind of a happiness that you only have 3 days a week? A happiness that's just only so good and then it just wears off? Or all the happiness now at the expense of happiness in the future? Or, on the other hand, would you go for perfect happiness, perfect lasting peace of mind, contentment that never harms anybody, that never wears off? So it's a leading question, isn't it? Which one? If we put it like that, it's a no-brainer. And yet, unconsciously, what's the one that we go towards without even realizing? So we can think, well, the big question is lasting happiness possible? And if it is possible, what's stopping us? And somehow our happiness is bound up with the happiness of everyone around us. So we have our own motivation, what we're yearning for, striving for, and fundamentally what we all want is to feel peace of mind and safe and meaningful. And then think, wow, if we were able to achieve that, how would our relationships change? How would the world change? How would we be able to help others? So our motivation for others can be even bigger than our motivation for ourselves. So we can have the entire spectrum for our purpose for today and for the whole course, thinking for our own lasting peace of mind, long-term benefit. And then recognizing how we affect the world immediately, but also in the long term. So setting our motivation, may we be able to bring that kind of peace and happiness to everybody. And everything that we do in this class can go towards that. So then take a nice deep breath and open your eyes if they're closed. And let's go through the first part of this whole course, the happiness part. So the Buddha actually, the enlightened one, the Buddha who awakened, he started off just like us, a human being with questions and problems. He was kind of like the alpha male of his time, born into really fortunate circumstances and everything laid out on a platter, talented at everything, and you know, found that that wasn't enough. Just like we find that all of the wealth in the world isn't enough. It's not enough when you don't have your health or you don't have love, as we're finding with the coronavirus. So the Buddha put this extraordinary amount of energy into really finding what is happiness, how to liberate our mind from problems and stress and all of those deep causes. And he identified different types of happiness or different levels of happiness. And luckily for us, then the Buddha spent about 45 years sharing his experience and putting his insights into all different ways of explaining them, different ways for all different types of people. So when I first heard about these 3 types of happiness, it was a game changer for me. It really put things into perspective. And actually, the whole thing comes from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the blessing of the Guru, at a Happiness and Its Causes conference. And he was having in conversation with B. Alan Wallace. So 2 amazing, great practitioners and scholars. And so I madly wrote down everything, and this whole course basically comes from that one talk. So let's have a look at the 3 types of happiness. All right, the first type of happiness, and it's the one that we're probably the most familiar with, is called the lesser happiness of clinging. Oops. So that's quite a weird term for happiness, but we'll see why it's called this, the lesser happiness of clinging. And so it's the kind of happiness or pleasure that we get from what comes in from the senses. So I don't know if you've got a sweet tooth or not, but I tried to find a picture that just looked like a banquet and a little bit over the top. So what comes in from the senses, how we just enjoy good food. We enjoy the music that we like having nice clothes, a pleasing home, being comfortable, a comfy bed, all of those things. Now, if we just leave it at this, its pinnacle is hedonism. So if you're a materialist, this is it. This is what we strive for. So we become a foodie, for instance. So I have some friends who, when they turned 40, they decided to have a birthday party in Thailand, a foodie birthday party. So for 2 weeks, them and all of their friends went to Thailand and just ate. So that was the pinnacle. That was the ultimate thing for them. If everything is just this life, just the material world, then you just go for it. And if you've got the finances and before coronavirus and you could travel, then you could do that. So you can kind of see that what it is kind of summed up as is what we get from the world. It's very based on our circumstances. And because of that, then also because it's based on our circumstances being right, and on external things, on all the various causes and conditions, there is an irony here that what brings us happiness also brings us the most misery. The very things that bring us happiness cause us misery. Why? Because they don't last. So with the food, you know, you eat, and then I think they say the first 3 bites are the best, and then after that it's all downhill after that, but you're trying to capture the joy of those first 3 bites, so you keep eating more and more and more. And so then, of course, then you have to vary it. Then you get sick of that one, so you have a new dish. And the first 3 bites of that, whoa, fantastic. Then you get sick of that and you have a new one. So it doesn't last. Not only that, but if you ate everything on there, how would we feel? The initial pleasure of yumminess would very quickly turn into agony and feeling really sick, and then deep regret. Anyone who's eaten a pack of Tim Tams has this experience right there in a microcosm. So that's just to do with you know, what comes in from the senses. Or if you think about, say, your favorite song, have you ever had a favorite song that you played over and over and over again, and then suddenly 3 months later you cannot listen to that song one more time? Not only that, but with all the stuff that we have, when we have things, then we have things to worry about. So if you have an old bomb of a car, you don't really worry if it gets scratched or anything like that. You can kind of relax. But if you have a new car, someone's told me that you're really uptight about it and protective of it, and then once you get the first scratch, then you can relax. So somehow we think that those two things are separate. The worry and the thing somehow can be separated, but they come together. So for this reason, the lesser happiness of clinging, there's nothing morally bad about it. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with enjoying food or having a favorite song or having a really good car. But the drawback is part of it. The drawback is that it's fleeting, that it changes, that the happiness can disappear almost immediately, and that's part of the story. It's not an aberration. And so what happens is we keep on thinking, oh, maybe it's just that we need better food and then we'll be happier. Or maybe we just need a better car and then we'll be happier. So are there any questions yet about this, or is it fairly clear? So there's more to this story with the lesser happiness of clinging. So another level is this second part, the mental happiness. So the first one was what came in from the senses, but then there's also the happiness just of our day-to-day kind of consciousness. Again, it's what we get from the world, and it's the kind of happiness that we get from being entertained, from mental stimulation of just having a challenge, like if there's anyone that loves doing Sudoku or crosswords or solving a problem, the kind of mental happiness from just reading a really good book, watching movies. Also the kind of happiness or satisfaction that comes from earning an honest living, from feeling worthwhile, that you have a place in the world. So I've just been looking at the news, you know, there's quite a few demonstrations in some of the Midwest states in America of, you know, stop the lockdown, we want to work. So that's this real deep-seated feeling that people have of wanting to contribute, to earn an honest living, to feel worthwhile, that we have our place in society and that we matter and that we're contributing. And if everything's going right, we can actually think that we're happy. And so I thought this, you know, when things are going well, and you think, oh no, you know, it's okay, everything's all right. But it's really telling when our circumstances change, because this is also circumstantial. It's dependent on what we get from the world. As we can see so dramatically what happened with coronavirus, the moment we lose our liberty to be able to go outside, and that we can't do the things that entertain us and stimulate us mentally, that we can't see the rest of our family, our happiness completely deteriorates. So we can see how dependent we are just on those conditions, just on the conditions of being able to get out of the house. So how many people have cabin fever now, and before thought life was okay, life was turning out all right, and now suddenly it's not. So then we think the problem is the coronavirus. But actually the problem is that we're dependent on our happiness coming from our circumstances, but our circumstances are unstable. And whilst we can continuously adjust them, we think everything's okay. It's just when we can no longer control them or no longer adjust our comfort levels that we become aware of our incredible dependence on just our circumstances being all right. Even just, it's kind of like the more we trust them, the more we're let down or betrayed by them. And we're so lucky in Australia because we do have a lot of room to move. We do have many ways that we can deal with this kind of lockdown. And so in a way, we have this false sense of security. So just one thing has to change. We get sick, or we lose our job, or somebody dies, and our entire happiness crumbles. So the thing about this one, no matter how hard we strive, things are out of our control. So again, we kind of, because we're relying on what we get from the world, we think if we can just control the world, then we'll be happy. But the world is an unpredictable place, and our health is unpredictable, and the environment is unpredictable, and other people are unpredictable. And that's their nature, this nature of change and instability. So whilst we try and control the uncontrollable, it's like trying to control the weather. So you can kind of get the idea. It's kind of better to try and go with the weather than trying to stop the weather. And actually, no matter how hard we strive, things are out of our control, things change. That striving to control the uncontrollable is what brings the angst, what brings the suffering. Now, so that's the lesser happiness of clinging, and you can kind of get an idea. It's lesser happiness because it's fleeting. It doesn't last. It needs constant maintenance. It's the lesser happiness of clinging because it's what we get from the world, and we need to be constantly replenished. So before I go on to the next level of happiness, what questions do you have? Just stick them in the chat and I'll bring the box up. You've got time to write something in the chat, it's okay. Either it's clear as mud or someone's writing something in there. Are you sure there's no questions? Oh, good. Karina says it's been really clear. That's great. So I thought I'd get the most depressing bit over first. Well, let's see. Okay. So the next level of happiness must look different to what we expect, because someone dying would be hard to live with. Yeah, well, see, that's the ultimate thing, isn't it? So this lesser happiness of clinging, if we're just clinging to having that person there, most of the time we can deny the fact that one of us is going to die first. And it's only when something like coronavirus comes along, or there's a health issue that arises, that reality comes crashing in on us. And because we've been out of touch with reality, it's painful. And then we think it's the disease that's the problem. But actually, that instability of our health and that potential to die, that's there all the time. And it's denying it that causes the suffering. To give you an example, many people say when they have a near-death experience, what happens is their whole perspective changes, and what matters to them totally changes. So in a way, what we can do is let ourselves have a near-death experience and see what happens. So let's have a look at some of the things that then come up. So if we do have a near-death experience, what's a different level of happiness? And I'm sure you'll all recognize this. So this next level is called the higher sources of happiness. Again, there's several aspects to this. It's not the most high, but definitely higher. And how come I've got a picture of people shoveling mud after a flood up there? Well, all will become apparent in a moment. The higher sources of happiness are much, instead of what we get from the world, it's what we bring, how we contribute. And the first one is the happiness of renunciation. So renunciation is, it's a Buddhist term, and for many years, I got it totally wrong. I thought when everyone said, oh, you've got to develop renunciation, what I heard was no more fun. It's not what it means at all. So renunciation means being able to drop mundane concerns. So to be able to drop the worldly concerns about comfort or status, about being hungry or tired or any of those things that preoccupy us a lot, to actually focus on something that really means something, that matters to us, that we care about. And we can't really focus on something greater than ourselves unless we can drop those mundane concerns. Now, it's known as eudaimonic happiness. So the previous one was hedonic happiness, what comes in from the senses. This one, eudaimonic happiness. And I'll just get the rest of the, let's go back a bit. The reason why I put the picture of the flood up there, Brisbane flood, was this is a perfect example of renunciation right there. So normally, if you were a hedonist, there's no way you'd want to be mucking about in stinky mud on a hot 32-degree humid day with bits of sewage all mixed in there and rubbish and rotting things. No one would want to do that. And yet, a decade ago now or so, when the Brisbane floods happened, and the council sent out like a text message or whatever, anybody wants to help the various suburbs where they're really inundated and in a lot of trouble. And they thought about, 400 people would show up, something like that, to help. And on the day, about 2,000 people showed up with their gloves and their buckets and their brooms and shovels and whatever, and complete strangers went and helped other complete strangers from the flood. And people were really joyous about it, and they just genuinely really wanted to help. So that's renunciation right there. You let go of the worldly concerns of if it's hot or if it stinks, and you get this incredible joy and sense of fulfillment and happiness from helping others. And that sense of satisfaction lasts longer than something that comes in from the senses. So that even if you get tired or you're hot, you still feel good about it. And to this day, people who went out and helped then, even if they've got the flu now, even if they're depressed now, they can think back about that and again, they feel good still. Whereas like if we think about the cake that we had when we were 14, we still don't feel good about that. So it's kind of ironic, you know, the previous happiness, because it was about what we got from the world, is very difficult to share. So this one, actually, sharing, we have less of our stuff, but we feel more, we feel better. So it's quite different. Eudaimotic happiness is about something that's much more than the stuff of the senses, than the materialist. So when we share our time, when we share our effort like this in cleaning up, when we share our food, we have less food, but we have more happiness. So this kind of eudaimonic happiness is much deeper and long-lasting than a mood or physical enjoyments of food and music and whatever. Let's see. Now, there was another aspect of this one. So on an emotional level, this kind of gives you an idea with, say, with the flood, but also the happiness of renunciation when it comes to our emotions. So if we can let go of our immediate need to feel okay and have the courage to look at our emotional situation or look at a problem or look at a difficult issue and bear the discomfort, then we can actually get to our values and our meaning. Then we have the courage to deal with things. So most of the time, you know, we panic, we feel bad, we go, oh, no, I don't want to feel bad, we'll do anything to get rid of it. And so a lot of the time what we do is we just do the quick fixes. So, you know, in my case, I just drank lots of vodka. Now I just eat chips. So, you know, it's a very short-term Band-Aid measure. We need to have some form of practice of renunciation to be able to actually deal with the real issues that are going on. And that kind of renunciation is being able to drop that need for comfort or safety. So again, it kind of reminds me of what's going on in the world now with the coronavirus and how people have this need for safety. And so they just want to say, things will get better. Stop the lockdown. as if saying it will make it so. And that kind of irrationality comes from this need, second by second, to feel okay. And that's because we're relying on that lesser happiness of what we get from the world. So this higher source of happiness, it's actually being able to kind of let go, to renounce that need for comfort and safety just for a moment or two, to be able to look clearly at the situation and see the bigger story. So there is a translation here between these external activities that like cleaning up from the flood or sharing things, and then also applying it to our kind of emotional state. And that leads us to the next aspect of this. Oh yes, so deeper than a mood or a sensation. So the next aspect of this higher source of happiness is the happiness of letting go. So it's quite similar to renunciation, and but in particular, this is the happiness of letting go of the disturbing emotions. So the one with the renunciation is letting go of that clinging to things being good and comfortable and just la 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 la, not listening. This one's much more just letting go of the disturbing emotions of when we're ruminating, when we get in a real funk, we start really resenting somebody. We go over and over and over. Can't say like a cracked record anymore because who knows what records are. The kind of rumination that we do with, it can be with resentment. It can be with worry and fear and anxiety. So we're going around and around and around, and it gets its own momentum, and we just wind ourselves up. So when I was little, my mother used to say to me, Miffi, just let go. And I'd go, how do I let go of what? What on earth does that mean? How do you let go? You can't just let go when you're all so tense. So what it means is that to recognize first off that we are ruminating, that we are going around and around and around in circles, and that momentum, it's difficult to stop, but it's not us. To recognize how rumination harms us, even though it's addictive, it harms us. And so the way that we probably have been able to let go is, say for instance, if you've had a disagreement with somebody, or they've done something badly by you or betrayed you, and then you come to this aha moment where you go, you know what, it's not worth it. All of that turmoil and resentment and angst and worry, and you just think they're not worth it. Usually we think they're not worth it, or it's not worth it. I'm just going to let it go. It's not worth it. It's not worth the bother. So that's kind of getting that bigger picture, isn't it? That there's all that turmoil, maybe about a situation we can't do anything about, or we can let that turmoil go. The situation's still the same, but we've let our stress go. We've let our fighting against it go. We've let that kind of emotional tantrum go. We've let the cycle of rumination go. So instead of stewing on it, instead of getting more and more wound up, we let go of our anger, we let go of our craving. So that letting go, it doesn't solve the root problem, but it certainly gives us some breathing space, and that's what we need to be able to do the work deep down. So we kind of recognize following negativity, it's just not worth it for your own peace of mind. Even if the other person's wrong and you're right, it's still not worth all that upset. So the colloquial term for it is, hey, don't sweat the small stuff. And how do we not sweat the small stuff? We focus on the big things that matter to us. So if we just focus on the small stuff, they just get bigger and bigger and bigger. I've had that experience over and over again until they're enormous, until all-encompassing. So how to actually let go is to pull back and go, what really matters? What are the main things that matter? And hasn't this whole coronavirus experience really pointed that out? That when it comes to it, what are the things that matter? One of the things that's become very, very clear is we don't need to buy all of that stuff. All of the stuff, the little frou-frous, the knickknacks. We don't need to do all of that, all of the personal grooming, like, you know, fake nails and hair and la la la. Like, we just don't need to bother with all of that stuff. What a relief. And we didn't realize how little of that stuff that we need until we're really stripped down to the basics. Here we are, just ourselves at home with ourselves. What are we going to do? What actually matters here? And really quickly, what becomes apparent, isn't it? Without even having to think about it, what matters is the people we love and our health. So one of the other ways to let go is to stop worrying about what other people think. That too is to not sweat the small stuff. And there is a great relief when you let that go, when you stop trying to impress others. So there's that thing that's been going around Facebook for quite a few years now about the top 5 regrets of dying people. So this hospice nurse noticed that you know, some people were able to die with a peaceful mind, and others were really regretful about their life. You know, they lived this long life, spent so much energy on their life, and yet had deep regrets. And so the main things that people really regretted were not telling people that they loved them, and not living a life true to yourself. One of the classic examples was, like, if you're gay, having hidden that you're gay, trying to impress others, or trying to put forward this image that wasn't true to you, and that's really soul destroying. And so what these people were saying was they just wished they'd ditched it years ago, that it would have been better to go through the hardship and actually be authentically themselves than try and please others. So often, you know, you might be going through life, a lot of the motivation might be to please your parents, to impress your parents, or to get some appreciation, or be some status from a job. You might have wanted to be an artist your whole life, but were pushed into being a lawyer. You might have felt that, you know, that could have been the other way around, that all you wanted to do was maths and law, and you ended up doing some other thing that you thought was cool, or that would impress people, or that would make somebody else happy. And in the long run, it just doesn't work like that. So this worry that we have of what others think, and this incredible instinctual need for approval and appreciation, again, that's what we get from the world. That's that lesser happiness of clinging, and it needs constant maintenance. Whereas this one, the higher source of happiness, is being able to actually contribute by being authentically you. And then there's always going to be haters going to hate, but you will get this much deeper sense of satisfaction. So you'll know you did your best. You stuck by your ethics, and, you know, the things that we regret, aren't they? They're the ones that we haven't done. So this, the way to actually get to this deeper level, we can't get to it unless we let go of that momentary need of approval and appreciation, that lesser happiness of clinging. So there's a lot in this letting go level of happiness, but we can really see that kind of thing, even if it's really hard work, and even if it's quite challenging, like when I decided to make costumes for the circus, being an artist is difficult at the best of times, and everybody's so poor, and so pretty much you'd do 2 jobs which were basically free. Maybe you'd cover your expenses, and then someone would get a grant, and then the 3rd job everybody would get paid. So really tough. And I've never been so poor as when I was an artist. There was like those 15 years of making costumes. Dirt poor, like literally I'd ran out of 20 cents to put into the hot water in Melbourne. So I had no hot water. And I can remember crying because all the soles of my shoes had worn out, and I'd stuck layers of newspaper and they'd all got soggy and wet, and my winter coat had worn out. So really poor. And yes, it affected my mood a lot, but deeper down, I was absolutely determined to do my art, because that's what kept me sane. And doing those costumes and helping bring those people's acts to life and have them blossom as artists, that still makes me happy to this day, even though it was really hard. So that it's kind of like you go for the deeper long-term happiness, but you can't do that if you're still clinging to those worldly comforts to the senses, to various moods. So definitely, it was definitely worth it, but I'm not minimizing that it is hard. All right, so the third level of this one, of higher sources of happiness. Oh, so before we go on, you know, are there any questions yet? I feel like I've been raving on for a bit. Anything about this one of the kind of deeper satisfaction that we get from letting go? Well, hopefully it's clear. If you have any questions, you just stick them in the chat. So still on this level of higher sources of happiness. So this one, again, what we bring to the world, but it's the happiness of deep concentration. So I ran out of space of all the different ways that we can get this, of putting it in on the slide. But the kind of concentration, the kind of real amazing feeling of being in the zone, of being one with the work. So many biographies and movies that I've seen about painters, for instance, I remember a movie about Jackson Pollock, a great painter, of how he would paint for hours and hours, really physical painting, completely in the zone, oblivious to his own, whether he was hungry or tired or thirsty, and really quite transported. And many of these people will say it's not them painting, it's like they're the conduit for all the energy of the universe, or of God, or enlightened energy, or whatever it is, to be perfectly expressed. Runners, marathon runners have also said, and great tennis players, great athletes, when they're in the zone, it takes a while to get there. So you're kind of pushing, and then you push through the barrier, you hit the wall, they say you hit the wall, and then you're through, and then you are one with the activity. And there's this flow, and it's really blissful. It's quite interesting because it's not physically that you're comfortable, is it? It takes a lot of effort, but everything comes together harmoniously without any blockages. If you've ever had this experience, you might have also had the experience where, say, you're running or you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, and you're one with the work, you're in the flow, and then you go, wow, things are going really good now, and then bam, fall off, fall down, trip, whatever it is, because that self-consciousness comes back again, that me and other, self and other comes back, and it breaks that flow. Great mathematicians, physicists, scientists, when they're contemplating a problem, going through a problem in that field of the mind, completely immersed. You can be in that state of contemplation for hours, and it can feel just like a second. So they say there's no sorrow in these states. They're timeless, they're transcendent. So that means that there's no angst. We are really harmonious and one with our external environment, our internal environment. There's no barrier of self and others anymore. And because there is no artificial barrier like that, it's naturally blissful. It's this incredibly deep, blissful state. So this is like the pinnacle of a non-religious path. It's also, for many religions, this kind of experience is the pinnacle of a religious experience. It doesn't have to be religious. So many scientists and mathematicians throughout history have kind of described states like this. The only way that we can be in a state like this of deep concentration is if we've kind of attained mastery over what we're doing. So there's been that thing, you attain mastery after of having, say, put in 10,000 hours, so that you become completely skilled at what you're doing. You don't have to think, what do I do here anymore? It's automatic and you're accomplished at it. So much so that you have complete freedom to splash about in whatever activity that you're doing in whichever way that you want without ever losing your concentration. There's even stories in history of great mathematicians or scientists being like in a reverie like this for 12, 13 hours. Marathon runners that do those, the ultra marathons, they run for 24, 48 hours. Painters can be transported for days. But this is the drawback. At some stage, it comes to an end. We have to emerge from that state. It can't last for more than a few days, because we're going to have to go to the loo. We're going to have to eat. We're going to have to drink, and then that flow is stopped. So you can see it really is the pinnacle of, say, a secular life and of some kind of religious experience, but it's not counted as the highest source of happiness for that reason, that it doesn't last forever. So I wanted to read you, so this is from Matthew Ricard. Oops, here we go. Happiness, a guide to developing life's most important skill. And I have a couple of things to read to you from this. So this one, distinguishing happiness from pleasure. So this is kind of like thinking about the lesser happiness of clinging, and this one, the higher sources of happiness. So bring to mind a past experience of physical pleasure with all of its intensity. Remember how you enjoyed it at first, and then how it gradually changed into a neutral feeling, and maybe even waned into lassitude or a lack of interest. Did it bring you a sense of inner or lasting fulfillment? So my favourite example about this is like cheesecake, especially if you're hungry and you haven't had breakfast. And I think, oh, cheesecake, I love cheesecake. And then, you enjoy it at first, and then third, fourth, fifth bite, now it's just kind of claggy. And this is like, oh, do I really want to eat all of that? And so then, of course, it wears off for a bit. And then the next day, I just want cheesecake again. So where is that inner lasting sense of fulfillment? So then, remember an occasion of inner joy and happiness. Recall how you felt, for example, when you made someone else really happy, or when you peacefully enjoyed the company of a loved one, or the sight of beautiful natural scenery. Consider the lasting effect this experience had on your mind and how it still nourishes a sense of fulfillment. Compare the quality of such a state of being with that of a fleeting sensation of pleasure. Learn to value these moments of deep well-being and aspire to find ways to develop them further. So even though, say, enjoying natural scenery, that's kind of what we get from the world, but it's kind of a bridging one, isn't it? Because we get it from the world, but when we are in beautiful natural scenery, or if you're lucky enough to have a garden or a deck with some greenery while we're on lockdown, that what it bridges is to some inner space. And there is something about being able to just sit quietly with yourself that is such a relief. So it bridges to that inner experience that's a lot more to do with what we bring to the world, what our inner life is, how we contribute, where our meaning is and our value. So if we were a materialist, this would be it. The deep states of concentration, and we'd spend our life trying to do that. And, you know, we still may have quite a bit of dissatisfaction. So I remember maybe a couple of years ago now, there was a scientist from Australia who was incredibly bright. He was in his 80s or 90s, and he really fought to go over to wherever it is, Switzerland, and be euthanized because he'd just recently been confined to a wheelchair and he'd really lost his independence. And I remember feeling real mixed feelings about this, because I thought, my first thought was, how incredibly selfish. Here he is, he's this incredibly talented scientist with so many young people that could still benefit from his insight and his courage and his background, you know, his wealth of experience. And he just wanted to end his life. And he wanted to end his life basically because he'd lost his independence. And for someone who's an alpha male, who's used to being the professor for the last 50 years, who's been able to do everything and be master of their own universe, to suddenly be dependent on others, it's a real demoralizing experience. And that overwhelmed everything, that he was just like, no, I don't want to live my life anymore. Not one thought for how he could contribute to others. So what a loss for all of those young students, and what a loss for him. You know, so instead of, and I think why this happened was that he relied on his ability for states of deep concentration to really get into what he was doing, and it was still dependent on the circumstances being right. And so the moment you need someone else to take you to the toilet, or that you can't get from one side of the room to the other, or that you might have to rely on an assistant and thank them, unbearable. And so the world was deprived of this guy, that it was just his body that was failing, his mind wasn't failing. So this, when we just think that that's all there is, this state of deep concentration, if we can't do that anymore, that's the end of our life, we're really cutting ourselves off, and we're depriving others of all of that experience and effort that we put into our life, and it could have continued on. So I thought that was a real tragedy, and the reason why he probably didn't think that he could continue to be of benefit in his life was because he was a materialist. And so he didn't have a bigger picture than that. It was just this life and just this experience of transcendence, and if you could no longer have that, then it was all over, because there's more. But this is something we're not necessarily aware of. So the third level of happiness is called the bliss of the stages of enlightenment. And it's about what we become. Not what we get, not how we contribute, but how we change, what we become as a person. And positive psychology talks a lot about this as being like an optimal state of flourishing. So it's based in ethics. We recognize our dependence on others, our interdependence, how we're intricately bound up with others, with the kindness of others, how what we do affects others, how what others do affects us. And so therefore, we matter and others matter equally. So we recognize that real fundamental interdependence that we have. We've been working on removing our disturbing emotions, and so therefore we feel progressively more peaceful, as we let go of more things, as we're more authentic, we feel a greater relief, we feel a greater emotional freedom. And this kind of process is cumulative. It's kind of like when we learn to read, it takes effort at the beginning, doesn't it? But now we don't have to concentrate and go, now I must concentrate on how to read. We just do it effortlessly. And reading isn't something that we can forget how to do. Once we've got it, it's like it's a realization, isn't it? Unless we have some external, brain malfunction or something like that. But the actual experience of learning to read, it's our wisdom growing. And that isn't dependent on external things anymore. That's there. We have that realization. Same with our emotional resilience and our emotional maturing. That can't be taken away. It's not circumstantial. It's there as a resource for us to draw on continuously. So it can't be lost. And so for that reason, in a way, it's not dependent on circumstances. So with the coronavirus lockdown, even though our circumstances are dramatically changed, our own peace of mind is dependent on us, on our mind, not our circumstances. We can still find a sense of optimism and of gratitude and of real revelation of what actually matters in the world by just reflecting on the situation, by using our mind. So our peace of mind isn't dependent on circumstances. And as we learn this, we become more confident, naturally more confident. So you remember Nelson Mandela in prison, he cultivated his inner sense of worth of himself and his people, his well-being. He thought they can deprive me of my freedom, but not my mind. So each stage along the path, each challenge that we meet, when we do meet it like this, we're less bound by disturbing emotions. We develop, it's I suppose the colloquial term's called resilience. Okay, and so of course what distracts us from this is just how our attention is captured by outer pleasures, by what comes in from the senses. Just because it's grabbing our attention the most. We just go, oh, look at that. And we forget to look within because we're not used to it. So the thing about this optimal state of flourishing is it's not a high. It's not like a drug high where we're kind of agitated, where we're constantly craving to be entertained. It's actually a state of feeling really normal, but good normal. So it's just like when they say, you never appreciate your health until you lose your health. So, you lose your health, you get sick and you go, oh, I wish I was back to normal. But when we're normal, we don't notice it. We just think it's natural. We think this natural flourishing, being able to do whatever we want to do, oh yeah, that's just normal. So it's not a high agitated state of feeling. And again, with our emotional freedom, again, it's like our baseline of natural positivity, openness, confidence. It's very calm. It's not agitated. And because it's calm and because it's this really, it's the basis or the ground, we don't notice it. Just like we don't notice our health or we don't notice our freedom. We didn't notice how great it was just to be able to get out and about until it's taken away from us. So it's quite a subtle thing in that way. So as we go along, we're progressively, say from when we were 7 to when we were 14 to however old we are now, we've grown as a human being. We've whittled away our negative traits. We've tried to develop our strengths and our positive characteristics. So if we think about this as a continuum, each day we just whittle away a little bit more of our negativities, and each day we try and build our positive characteristics. Eventually, we'll have no negative traits whatsoever, and we'll have developed all of our potential to its ultimate, just by persevering. And that's what enlightenment is. So enlightenment isn't like a ta-da, abracadabra, change into a Buddha. It's actually this progressive state of just whittling away the negativities and developing your virtues, your positive, your natural potential. And if you keep on doing that, eventually enlightenment is unavoidable. So that's why it's called the bliss of the stages of enlightenment, because each stage along the way, each little tiny bit, as you know, you have one little win, you do your homework and you get a result and you go, wow, and just one tiny little thing gives you this huge burst of confidence. And that kind of confidence or energy that you get, that underlies everything. It's not dependent on a mood. It's not dependent on circumstances. It's there as a cumulative development. Now there was something here that I wanted to say. Oh, that's right. So this little story I've got for you about how come we all have this potential for optimal flourishing. So a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, I was working in a call centre. So I was one of those people that would call you up at dinner time and ask you inane, stupid questions, political questions or whatever, you know, do this poll or that poll. And so when I got the job, I just thought, oh no, this is going to be horrible because I can't handle the rejection. And what if everybody hangs up on me and everyone's going to hate me? And I was terrified, and I'm not good on the phone at the best of times. But it was kind of like an emotional boot camp for me. So what I found I could do was, in the space of time it took to dial the numbers, I'd have like this lightning fast set my motivation. And the quickest motivation that I could do while I was dialing the numbers was I wanted the person to be happier at the end of the call than at the beginning. So I tried to, you know, bring by me speaking with this person may make the connection that then I can bring them to enlightenment in this life or future lives, that kind of thing. But that's quite a long thing. So the bare bones of it was happier at the end of the call than at the beginning. So I really did have this sincere attitude when I was making the calls, as well as, you know, I want to make money or get through the whatever it is of the poll. And what I found, which is mind-blowing, was that human beings, just on their base level, when they're just being fairly neutral, they have a genuine willingness to help and to be kind. And that's the baseline. Human beings, there is a natural goodness. And people only act out badly or are rude on the phone or hang up on you. What I found was when something was obviously going wrong. But most of the time, without fail, 95% of the time, people would actually try and help me. They'd try and answer the questions, even if they're about dog food or about the Prime Minister. Just naturally, the willingness to help, to share, to help you out. And the times that people would hang up or be really rude, you could tell that there was something bad going on in the background. Either you could hear there was an argument happening. One time I rang up and they said, don't you realize we're in the middle of a wake, a funeral? I was like, oops. So you could see that people were under stress, and that's how come they acted badly. So this I found really amazing, that here I was thinking that I would just be rejected and dejected and traumatized from this job, and actually what it showed me was human beings are naturally good. Over and over again, it just proved it to me. So we have this natural goodness, this natural ability to feel good, and a natural wish to help others, to get out of ourselves. And if people are caught unawares, they'll try and help. And it's only with all the pressures of the world that things go wrong. Yeah, there's one other thing I wanted to read to you from Matthew Ricard. So this will blow your mind, you know, put it into a little bit of perspective. So here we go. So when he's talking about happiness, actually the happiness of what we bring to the world, so that middle level, he's talking about, hang on. So by happiness, I mean here a deep sense of flourishing that arises from an exceptionally healthy mind. This is not a mere pleasurable feeling, a fleeting emotion or a mood, but an optimal state of being. So that's this one, how the stages of development, our natural development. Happiness is also a way of interpreting the world, since while it might be difficult to change the world, it's always possible to change the way that we look at it. So for instance, with the coronavirus, you know, we can be riling at the world and getting cabin fever, how we've lost our freedom and our liberty and we just want to get out and about. Or we can be on a hashtag Corona retreat, as many Long-Reach Vipassana students are, and really enjoying just blitzing the Buddhist study. Just, okay, if I'm going to be confined to home, I'm doing a retreat. So Matthew Ricard goes on, so that's, you know, the way we frame our experiences changes everything. The common factor to all of these experiences would seem to be a momentary disappearance of inner conflicts. The person feels in harmony with the world and with themselves. Someone enjoying such an experience, such as walking through a serene wilderness, has no particular expectations beyond the simple act of walking. He or she simply is, here and now, free and open. And for just a few moments, thoughts of the past are suppressed, the mind is not burdened with plans for the future, and the present moment is liberated from all mental constructs. This moment of respite, from which all sense of emotional urgency has vanished, is experienced as one of profound peace. For someone who's achieved a goal or completed a task or won a victory, the tension they've long carried with them relaxes, and the ensuing sense of release is felt as a deep calm, free of all expectation or fear. So these are all those kind of transcendent states that we've experienced at least once or twice in our life. But he goes on to say, this experience is just a passing glimpse brought on by a particular set of circumstances. We may call it a magic moment or a state of grace. But the difference between these flashes of happiness seized on the fly and the immutable peacefulness of the Buddha is as great as that between the tiny section of sky seen through the hot eye of a needle and the limitless expanses of outer space. So this bliss of the stages of enlightenment, it's kind of like we get flashes of it when we have that transcendent experience of being in the zone. And that flash is like glimpsing the sky through the eye of a needle, but actually there's the whole sky there. And that's what the bliss of the stages of enlightenment is, this progressive development to optimal flourishing. That's what we can actually develop to. So it's kind of limitless until full awakening or enlightenment, enlightening our mind. Okay, so In summary, we've covered quite a lot this morning. We looked at the 3 types of happiness that the Buddha identified. I hope you found it as useful as I did, how much of our attention is focused on just what we get from the world. Like if I look at the ratio between how much of my focus is on all that happiness from the senses, what's the ratio of how much do I put my energy into contributing and really getting that deep sense of satisfaction? And how much energy or even focus do we put into developing those inner qualities that are not dependent on external circumstances whatsoever? So you look at your own ratio, it might explain things, hey? You know, we spend so much time and effort trying to be happy and we're just always behind the 8 ball. Well, this is why, isn't it? Because we're putting our focus where we can't actually find that kind of happiness. The lesser forms of happiness distract us. They capture our attention over and over. So the further classes that we're doing in this course about how to stop that attention capture. And that kind of lasting happiness that we want, that comes from within. That's the reliable one of our mind. And it really is reliable. So I have the last reading before we finish for today. Find it. So this is from a book called Happier by a Jewish guy, Tal Ben Shahar. You can see it. And it's it was a bestseller. He was going to come out to one of the Happiness and Its Causes conferences, but couldn't get a visa for some reason. But anyway, he's just talking about happiness perception, and I found this really interesting. Happiness perception is about recognizing that happiness is the ultimate currency, the end to which all other goals lead. Happiness perception is not about rejecting the material, but rather dethroning it from its status as the highest on the hierarchy. Aristotle understood this when he wrote that happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. So it's kind of like the ultimate currency. Even though we kind of work for money, why do we work for money? Well, we work for the happiness. So that's the ultimate currency. The Dalai Lama also said, whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in this religion or that religion, the very purpose of our life is happiness. The very motion of our life is towards happiness. The currency through which we take stock of our life, our perception of what matters, has wide-reaching consequences for our personal lives and for the whole of society. We enjoy higher levels of well-being when we recognize and internalize the fact that happiness is the ultimate currency. It's about asking the question, what will make me happier? What gives me meaning? What gives pleasure? What are my strengths? What is my calling? And identifying the things that you really want to do. With these questions comes a much higher likelihood that you will find the ultimate currency. So let's see, homework. Now, if you've got the notes, it should be, I think I combined them all together. Let me see. Yes, I did. So with the happiness notes, I have a very eccentric way of numbering things, but I think it's on page 4 and 5, the happiness worksheet and the happiness journal. So the happiness journal or the gratitude journal, just to write down 5 things that you're grateful for, that you just go, wow, I'm so lucky, every morning. That you feel really happy about, that you feel blessed, fortunate, It's not like you should feel grateful, but just how you just go, wow, how lucky am I? And try to write them 5 different things each day, but try and include those 3 levels of happiness. So, wow, how lucky am I? The first thing I always put down is my cat. I feel so happy that I have a cat. If you have a cat or a dog, you know, they bring a lot of joy. So that's one, but that's kind of like that lesser happiness, what comes in from the senses, just hanging out with, you know, with people, that beings that you like. Try and include the other things you feel real fortunate about. So for instance, I'm really fortunate that I get to lead a class like this because it helps focus my mind too, what really matters. And I feel so lucky about that. So those kind of things too, the 3 types of happiness, all 3 levels. And then something that you feel grateful or happy or fortunate about your inner qualities. So it's a little bit of a challenge there with a gratitude journal. The other thing too that you can have a look at on page 4, what is happiness? So right at the beginning of the class, when you wrote down what happiness is, hopefully it's kind of changed. You've got something to fill in now, to change a little bit, to add to. You might see what was missing in your definition, or you might see, yep, I was spot on. So to finish filling that one in, and then the other one, there's a question there of the infinite why regression. So asking why, and it's a way of getting from the way our attention is captured. I want to go on a holiday. I want to see Venice before it sinks. And then you ask why. Well, because I like the idea of travel. And why? Because it opens my mind to other people and places and things. And why? So that I can connect with others, so I can appreciate the great humanity. And why? To be happy. So you see the infinite why regression, you've got to show the workings like you do in maths to get down to that fundamental one of that happiness. But it's really worth showing all the steps, so that then if I don't ever get to Venice, who knows if we're ever able to travel overseas again, I don't think that now I'll never be able to be happy because we've got all the various levels. Okay, so that's the homework. I hope you really enjoy the homework. And next week we're going to look at habit patterns. So we've done the happiness bit. Next, habits. The neurology of a habit pattern, how they develop blow by blow, and then how we can deconstruct them blow by blow, so that the negative habits just don't arise anymore, don't arise at all. So I'd like to thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and let's please dedicate all of your efforts of dealing with the technology to get here, your good-heartedness, your sincerity, your efforts at concentrating whilst online, your courage to do the homework, and dedicate all of that for being able to develop your own inner sense of happiness and be able to share that with everybody in the world. So thank you so much, everybody. Really great. I really hope I see you all next week. Have a fantastic week. And thank you, Karina, for volunteering to be my stopgap and my co-host. See you, everybody. Oh, rightio.